I'd like to welcome everyone to the March edition of the Lake States Fire Science Consortium webinar series. My name is Charles Gable and I serve as the Program Director for the consortium and will be moderating the webinar and panel discussion this afternoon. Today we're fortunate to have Dr. Jessica Meisel of the Lake States Fire Science Consortium and Michigan State University with us to share her work on fire science knowledge gaps in the Lake States region. Dr. Meisel will also be joined by a panel of managers and scientists towards the end of her presentation, including Joe Harris, Crystal Kern, Greg Peterson, and Michele Richards. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, we are funded by the Joint Fire Science Program and are one of 14 regional consortia across the country. Our mission is to accelerate the awareness, understanding, and adoption of wildland fire science information by federal, tribal, state, local, and private stakeholders across the region and adjacent Canadian provinces of Ontario and Manitoba. We strive to be inclusive, neutral science partners, working to foster collaboration among researchers and practitioners, organizations, and individuals by developing innovative approaches to science delivery while facilitating dialogue about new science findings and emerging needs. Before we get started here this afternoon with the actual webinar, I'd like to take a few seconds and go over our webinar interface using Adobe Connect. First, we recommend that you maximize your webinar window on your computer so that you can see the slides to their full extent. Second, if you'd like to interact with the speakers today or with other attendees or ask a question of the speakers, please use the chat box located in the lower left-hand portion of the screen. You can type your question or comment there and either hit the send button or just hit enter. I'll be monitoring those questions and comments as we proceed here this afternoon, and I'll make sure that Jessica and the panel have an opportunity to address them. We'll try to get to these as they come in, but we may need to wait until the end of the webinar to get to all of them. So please be patient if you don't get an answer right away. If you do experience some technical issues, we'll try to rectify those to the best of our ability. For example, if you are using Firefox this afternoon to view the webinar, you may want to make sure that you have your accessibility options set correctly so the program does not warn you when it redirects to the webinar interface. Keep in mind, we're not trained IT personnel, but we will do our best to help rectify any issues that we may have as we move on here this afternoon. And then finally, if you'd like to learn more about the Lake States Fire Science Consortium, what we're about and what we are doing, please visit our website at lakestatesfiresci.net and sign up to receive our newsletters and announcements of other activities. And there's a link on the consortium website where you can send us a note and we'd be happy to include you in our mailing list. With that, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Jessica Meisel. Jessica is currently an assistant professor of applied forest ecology and management at Michigan State. She received her BS in Life and Earth Sciences from Otterbein College here in Westerville, Ohio, and her PhD in ecology from The Ohio State University, where she worked with Dr. Ralph Borner on fire and fire surrogate study in mixed conifer forests of Northern California. Prior to joining Michigan State, Jessica spent 2 years as a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and then the last 2 years working in a similar position with the Lake States Fire Science Consortium, leading our knowledge gap assessment. Her primary research interests are fire effects on coniferous forests, soils, fire and fire surrogate forest management strategies, and the role of natural and anthropogenic black carbon in soil ecosystem processes. Today, Jessica will be presenting our findings related to the Lake States Fire Science Consortium Knowledge Gap Assessment with a focus on what we know and don't know about fire science in the Lake States region. She will be joined today by a 4-person panel to discuss these findings and opportunities to fill some of these gaps through existing monitoring programs. So with that, Jessica, I'll turn the webinar over to yours.
Okay, thank you. Anybody on the webinar now, if you can let me know if the sound isn't coming through, and we'll try to correct that. So I'm going to start here just showing some of the consortium objectives that Charles discussed. Our purpose is to accelerate awareness, understanding, adoption of wild and fire science information, to provide the best available information on fire fuels and fire-dependent ecosystems, and then also to create relationships within the consortium by linking people to, and by this, by helping to provide information and tools to support management in our region. The challenges with this is that in our region, sometimes the best available science is actually not representative of the Lake States region. And we know that fire was an important historical disturbance in our region, but we don't know as much about the role that fire played in eastern forests as what we know about fire's role in western forests. And in many of the national level syntheses of fire science information, the eastern region is broadly lumped together. For example, the Black Series volume on ecological effects of prescribed fire seasonality that came out in 2009, when they talk about eastern forests, most of the data they present comes from the southeastern United States. Also, the Rainbow Series is a pretty well-known series of fire effects, and the volume on fire effects on soil and water had a couple examples of data from the Lake States region, but this is limited to wetland soils or information on water pH. So as you can see in these figures I've shown on the bottom of these slides, there's a lot of variability in what is broadly lumped as the eastern region. And for example, there's variability in forest community composition, in physiography, in soil type, in vegetation type, in climate. And our argument is that this region, having region-specific information is really important for being able to design management practices and plan for long-term management in ways that are appropriate for our region. One of the earlier publications I found published in the 50s emphasized the importance of understanding fire ecology and fire effects in each combination of climate, soils, and vegetation. And in the Lake States region, we have a pretty good understanding of natural disturbance regimes and forest succession and dynamics, and names like Heinzelman, Freilich, and Mladenoff might sound familiar to you for those authors, but we know much less about how fire affects the biotic and abiotic components of our ecosystem. So for example, how does fire affect specific plant or animal species? How does fire affect soils? These are things that we don't, in general, know very much about. So an important first step of this, being able to provide region-specific information, is first figuring out what we actually know about fire science in this region. And so this Gaps in Knowledge project was the first step to identify what the current status is in published fire science information in the Lake States region. And we're interested in knowing not only what type of information exists as far as what topics have been studied, or whether the information comes from field-based studies or from models and simulation studies. We also want to know how much we know about each topic and what the overall quality of the information is in terms of, was it just a set of observations after a single fire, or was it something more robust like a replicated or controlled scientific investigation? And by doing this, we want to know where are the gaps in our information, where are the holes that we need to fill in, and which gaps are priority information needs. So to start this Gaps in Knowledge project, I started with several keyword searches. I used ISI Web of Knowledge to identify the body of published information about fire in our region. And Web of Knowledge is one of the premier academic research databases. It indexes about 23,000 journals. It also indexes many conference proceedings. It covers more than 250 different scientific disciplines and has more than 100 years of back files. And so in ISI Web of Knowledge, I use the all database functions, which searches several databases inside of Web of Knowledge, including Web of Science, biological abstracts, agriculture and life science abstracts, and a few more. And it does index academic theses and agency technical reports, but not completely. So we know that there are some holes in what ISI is even able to locate for us. And I use a series of keyword searches, different combinations of fire, smoke, burn, wildfire, and several different steps, and the final refinement was a location keyword using state or province and region keywords to try to identify as well as possible everything that would be possibly relevant to fire in the Lake States region. My general criteria were that the publication had to provide information about wildfire, prescribed fire, fire exclusion, fire suppression, fire ecology or fire effects, and that at least a portion of the study area had to fall within 150 kilometers from the official consortium boundary, which is shown in the map on the lower right-hand corner. As of today, I have identified 1,206 publications that meet this criteria. And that includes peer-reviewed scientific literature, conference proceedings, technical reports, such as agency technical reports, and then some academic theses. And the earliest publication dates I have are 1927, and I have included everything up until the end of 2012. So one of our objectives for this project was to increase the awareness and accessibility of regional information. This ties in with the overall consortium objectives. So in my work to identify gaps in knowledge, I developed this massive bibliography of publications that relate to fire in the Lake States region. And so we have provided that on our website as a searchable bibliography, a searchable citation database. And you can locate that, I'll pull up the arrow here, on any one of our home pages. You go here to the Science Library section on any page, click that, it'll pull you up to the Science Library, which gives you many different links here that Zeke has been populating with information. And the database is here by this large yellow arrow. If you click on that, it'll pull you up to this search page. And there are links here at the top. My arrow go. There are live links here that will give you more information about the criteria used to decide whether or not a publication should be included in this database or not. How the list will be kept current. Right now I'm using automatic publication notifications through ISI. What to do if you notice any missing citations in our database. And more information on the General Knowledge Gaps Analysis Project is on this link right here. So I'm not going to go through in any more detail, but back to the search page, you can enter search terms here to locate articles on a specific topic. You can search keywords, titles, and author names, or any word in the abstract. What I've noticed in this work is that sometimes it's difficult to identify publications that provide information on a topic you're looking for. For example, sometimes terminology is used inconsistently among authors. An example of this would be early use of fire intensity, when really what they were talking about is what we now understand as fire severity. Or another example would be if you're looking, in my case, if I'm looking for data on soils after fire, many publications will not use soil as a keyword if they provide some background information about soils when the main topic of their paper was something like vegetation. And so in addition to the keywords that authors have assigned, I also assigned additional keywords from a standardized list that I created, and that would help locate all publications that presented information on a wider variety of topics in the region. And so for example, if you're looking for examples of keywords to search that I assigned to these publications, you can click here for this list and pull up that window. When you enter a keyword, in this example, I entered the keyword mammals. You'll come up with a list of all articles that were keyworded with mammals. And you can sort them by year. You can sort the output by first author, last name, and alphabetical order by title. So, and then these titles are also live links. So once you click on the title for the full citation will come up. And for that full citation, you have the full citation information at the top, the abstract or summary about the publication, the full list of keywords, which includes author-assigned keywords and also the additional keywords I assigned as an effort to standardize how things are identified. And then finally, if the article is in the public domain, there will be a list here to access the article online. And if not, then there are links at the bottom where you can locate the full text of that publication through your state university library. So I do know that there are holes in this database, just one based on ISI's, whether or not publications are indexed by ISI. And we'll keep working on filling in these holes. So this is just kind of an invitation if for you in the audience, if you're looking through the database and you notice an article that you think should be in there that is not, please let me know and I'll do my best to add that so we can make it as complete as possible. So just moving on to part two, beyond just making information more available or making our consortium partners more aware of information, we're also working to assess what the state of our knowledge is and where the gaps in our knowledge are. So when I started this project, I was thinking that I would find this pretty comprehensive body of knowledge with clearly identified gaps. And what I really found reminded me more like a loosely organized pile of bricks. We know a little bit of information about a lot of different topics, but not really, we don't really have a great depth of information on many of those topics at all. So we were anticipating that we'd treat this project like a meta-analysis, but what we found is that there's just not enough information on any one topic to really support that kind of statistical approach. We've also found that in cases where people report fire effects information, they often don't report information about the fire, so that limits our ability to understand really how a fire is actually creating an effect that we observe. Approximately 30% of the publications in the database are modeling or simulation studies, so that has been a pretty active area. And in the next several slides, I'll show you some results I've compiled about specific topics on forest soils, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, arthropods. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on invasive plants because that actually, not invasive plants, on vegetation, because vegetation is actually probably the main topic that has been studied in this region. So instead of spending a lot of time on the vegetation part, I'll talk about some of the areas that are typically have not received a lot of attention. One of the first products from this project has been a peer-reviewed manuscript. This is open access. It's available online, and it's also in our database. I was looking at compiling the literature on fire effects on forest soils in the Lake States region, and we found a total of 63 publications. And in this manuscript, I've provided summary information for all the studies I located, and I also calculated the magnitude and the direction of fire effect for multiple physical, chemical, and biological soil variables. And magnitude and direction, I mean by what percent did fire create a change, and was it an increase or a decrease in the response variable? And so this work is important for just providing baseline information about what we know about how fire affects forest soils in this region. And this is particularly important because one of the most recent reports from the Forest Health Monitoring Program has documented patterns of prolonged regional drought. And if we are moving into climate conditions where extreme drought is more common, it's important to be able to evaluate whether the effects of fire that occur under these extreme conditions are out of the range of what we understand to be the historic range of variability. Many of the next figures I'm going to show you will follow a similar format, where I show on the y-axis the number of publications and the number of publications by different categories, which will be shown on the x-axis. So for in this example, we found that 52% of the publications were studies that were conducted in pine-dominated forests rather than in mixedwood or deciduous forests. So most of our information is from coniferous forests. Of the pine-dominated forests, most of those focus on jack pine forests, whereas only 5 studies occurred in mixed pine forests. Most of our information about fire comes from prescribed fire studies, whether it was prescribed fire conducted before or with or without harvesting, rather than information that comes from wildfire studies. Most of our information also comes from relatively short-term studies, and this is actually not a gap that is unique to the Lake States region. This is common in most fire literature, is that we know a lot about shorter-term studies and less about longer-term studies. In our region, chronosequences were a common approach for long-term studies, meaning we have forests that represent different stages of time since fire, rather than repeated measurements in a single forest stand. On the bottom figure on your left shows the number of publications reporting fire effects on soil chemical properties, nutrient pools, physical properties such as soil texture or water holding capacity, or biological properties such as soil organisms or rates of nutrient cycling. And the surprising thing about this is that most of the studies of biological properties focused on nutrient cycling, and we actually know very little about how fire affects soil organisms, even soil bacteria and soil fungi, the organisms that are very important for cycling nutrients. I'm just briefly going to touch on how fire affects, or what we know about fire and invasive plant species. In the database that I've compiled, we have a total of 12 publications that have reported results on invasive plant species. And out of this 12, 11 of them address fire effects in non-forest environments. So basically, we know absolutely nothing about how fire affects invasive plant species in forested environments. Of the studies that exist, most of them focus on spotted knapweed, and there have been a variety of response variables that have been measured, which again, this is another reason that makes it difficult to determine what overall trends or patterns in our knowledge are when a couple studies might report on how fire affects species richness and diversity, whereas others will report on biomass and others on percent cover. So we have kind of this very loose lattice work of information rather than a great depth of information. The next several slides I'll show you are from student projects for, I had 9 undergraduate students working with me over the past few years at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and they did a lot of work helping to populate the database and identify citations and locate PDFs for all of those citations for me to review. And again, these figures will follow the same format, the number of publications or number of responses on the y-axis, and then categories on the x-axis. So for fire effects on mammals, we have a total of 7 publications. At the time this study was done, I think I've located a couple more. 4 of those publications reported effects of wildfire, whereas 2 reported effects of prescribed fire, and then 1 didn't actually report what type of fire they were observing at all. We have information from 6 different ecosystem types, and oak savanna was the most well-studied habitat type, and we had 1 study that reported fire effects in sand plains. We have information on 11 different types of mammals across these 7 studies. Most of the information we have, or the most frequently reported species, were deer mice and red-backed voles. And then only 1 publication reported any information on all these other types of mammal species. The big gap that we see here is that we have absolutely no information on how fire affects wolves, coyotes, large cats, or bears. Okay, the next few slides will focus on what we know about fire effects on birds. And this first slide presents information on species level response. So this is basically if a publication provided information on a bird species, regardless of what bird species it was tallied into this figure. So this is the number of responses because some publications reported species level responses for more than 1 species. So if a paper provided information on 3 bird species, it would be tallied 3 times here into number of responses. Most of what we know comes from studies conducted in boreal forest, oak savanna, wetland brush environments, and then less so in pine barrens and just a couple responses in grassland environments. This figure here shows the number of positive responses that were reported in blue and the number of negative responses that were reported in red. And this again can be across any response variable, whether fire created a positive or a beneficial effect on whatever was measured versus a negative effect on whatever was measured. So for example, if fire increased population size, it would be coded as a positive effect. If it decreased population size, it would be a negative effect. There are a couple of questions there. Charles, do you want me to answer those now or wait until the end?
Sure. Since you've already stopped, why don't we go ahead and address the questions related to whether some of these mammals we would even consider that they be affected by fire.
So the first question is, should we even suspect that there is an effect of fire on large predators other than a response by their prey? And I mean, that's a good point. If prey are not affected, then I would potentially not expect an effect on large predators, except that, you know, we're talking about different scales of habitat size and potentially different types of habitat.
Well, what about bears? I think they were in that category, correct? Where there was basically no information in your database.
Mm-hmm.
What about a species like black bear that would be foraging at the same time on certain types of habitat that might be fire related?
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding what your question is.
Well, things like berries, vaccinium plants, and their response post-fire, and how that would impact black bear foraging. I mean, that's something that you would think that there would be an effect, but there obviously isn't anything out there in the literature to study what that effect might be.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's the benefit of having multidisciplinary post-fire studies. So you can actually evaluate what is the effect on the vegetation, especially plants that are used for food, what is the effect on different levels of the animal community, and so to really be able to tease out how each one is affecting the other.
Is it possible to go back 2 slides here without
Sure.
our complete train of thought?
This one right here?
Yep. And so I think there's another question that comes up from Jane Smith, that is this surprising that there are only 2 published reports or peer-reviewed papers dealing with white-tailed deer and fire effects?
Yeah, so all these studies are publications that use that were controlled in some way. So it was before versus after fire, or a burned area compared to an unburned area, where we could actually identify what the effect of fire was. And these summaries were done about a year ago. So since then, there have been a couple more publications I found that report fire effects on mammals, and I have not added those in. But yeah, I agree. It is sometimes really surprising how little information there is, and you know, in some of the cases, I really questioned, were my keyword searches enough to locate the information? You know, I've gone back and checked on different specific topics, but in many of the topics, we just find out that the publications don't exist. Or in some of the cases, for how fire affects invasive plants, for example, what we found is that there are several summaries that talk about plants that are found in the Lake States region, but all the data they report about how fire affects those plants comes from out of the region, outside the region. So yeah, and if I have missed a major body of information, then that's definitely what I need help identifying. And I'd appreciate suggestions if people know articles that I'm missing. So I'm going to keep moving here because I want to make sure that we have time for the panel at the end.
Sure.
Okay, so this slide here, we're still on birds. Some of the publications that reported fire effects on birds reported at the trophic level responses. So rather than reporting how an individual species responded, they report overall groups like timber gleaners, omnivorous ground foragers, in broad categories like that. And most of the information on trophic groups comes from boreal forest. Very few from oak savanna or mixed pine forest, and no data on any other ecosystems. This slide we're still on birds here again. I'm showing on the left-hand side the species level responses. On the right-hand side are the trophic group responses. And this slide breaks down the responses into whether responses were positive responses, meaning an increase or beneficial effect of fire, or negative responses. The 2 colors used on the bars, the dark color represents information that comes from wildfire studies, and the light color represents information that comes from prescribed fire studies. And so the number of positive responses we have is much larger than the number of negative responses that have been reported for individual bird species. Most of that information comes from prescribed fires. When you're looking at trophic groups, there's no difference between the number of no statistical difference between the number of positive responses and the number of negative responses. And for both categories, most of the information we have comes from wildfires. So we have slightly different types of information depending on whether we're looking at individual species or trophic groups. This slide shows tallies the responses we know about how fire affects reptile or amphibian species. And this is another surprising area. We found only 5 publications from our region that reported data from empirical studies of fire that were conducted in the Lake States region or within 150 kilometers around it. 4 of the 5 reported the effects of prescribed fire, so we only have 1 study that reported wildfire effects. 3 publications reported effects on reptiles, only 1 on amphibian species, and then 1 publication reported on both. Again, we have 5 ecosystem types that were reported, that were studied in the literature, and most of what we know comes from prairie environments rather than savanna, marsh, when we have a couple on forested environments. Most of the studies that have been published have reported on how fire affects population size of a reptile or amphibian species. Only 1 publication has reported on whether fire increases or decreases mortality. And then this slide is fire effects on arthropods, and arthropods meaning insects as well as other joint-legged creatures like spiders and mites. And for arthropods, we found a total of 31 publications that again reported data from empirical studies. Most of that information comes from studies on lepidopterans, butterflies and moths, or beetles, ground-dwelling beetles, coleopterans. And all other types of arthropods, such as crickets, grasshoppers, flies, bees and wasps, or spiders, were reported by fewer than 3 publications. Most of the information we have, again, comes from prescribed fire studies rather than wildfire studies. And most of the information comes from prairie and forest environments, less so from savanna, and we have just a little bit of information from alpha or barren ecosystems. This slide again shows that a variety of response variables have been reported on in the literature. Most studies report how fire affects the population size of organisms, some on how fire affects the species composition of arthropods, but there's other important things like life history processes or mortality and survival that are also important for understanding how fire affects arthropods. And one of the reasons that came up a couple times in these publications is that it's really challenging to identify arthropods, so that's just, we're somewhat limited by the knowledge base and the researchers that are doing these studies. So just in summary, some of the major gaps that I've observed, some of them I've showed you in the last 2 slides. Some of these major gaps in our regional information are things like long-term studies. Again, that's not unique to the Lake States region. We've somewhat limited in our understanding of how wildfire affects plant and animal species rather than prescribed fire. We limited information on how fire affects soil organisms and also nutrient pools, nutrient cycling in soils. We have very little information on how fire affects invasive plant species in forested environments rather than more open environments. We have no information on fire effects on bears or large cats, large dogs. Very limited information on fire effects on reptile and amphibian species in the Lake States region. And in arthropods, we have limited information on any orders besides lepidopterans and coleopterans. We also have some limited coverage on any topic across ecosystem types. So it's difficult to understand whether fire affects species differently in one ecosystem type than in another type. Other gaps are things like how fire affects, what fire effects are in lowland forests or fire in peatlands, what fire effects are under extreme weather conditions or in forest types where fire is an anomalous occurrence, things like northern northern hardwood forests. And some of the ways that the consortium is working to resolve these knowledge gaps are ways like our new internship program, where we pair managers and scientists, or managers and scientists have developed a collaboration and that we have funded a student to work on. And so we have 6 of those projects hitting the ground this summer. We've developed a network of demonstration sites. In our webinars, we've worked to pair scientists and managers and presentations, and we'll get to that, that part later on in the webinar today. And we've also involved scientists in the field tours that we've done. And so by working together across managers and scientists, we're hoping that we can begin identifying these gaps and then work to fill in our gaps in knowledge. And by doing that, we're hoping to keep working to increase our understanding of fire science and management in our region. So the next steps for our gaps in knowledge project will be to keep working on fact sheets or briefs that summarize the current state of knowledge, and also conduct more quantitative syntheses that will target for peer-reviewed journal articles, like the Fire Effects on Forest Soils publication that was published last year. Some of the recommendations I have for future research are to include information when you're doing research or monitoring, include information on your fuels, on your weather, and especially your fire behavior, and that will help us work towards more understanding the specific mechanisms by which fire creates a certain effect. So tying an effect to flame length, rate of spread, heat output, things like that. And also working towards developing a better understanding of how fire effects persist or don't persist over the long term. So by making study locations available, we can remeasure sites that have been measured in the past and then develop longer-term data sets. So my hope is that by highlighting some of these gaps that exist in our knowledge currently, that it started some wheels turning as far as ideas for new research or new monitoring projects that would help to fill in these gaps of knowledge. One of the JFSP administrators has described our knowledge base as immature, and so we're kind of at the infancy in our regional knowledge. And so by working together across these with these manager and scientist partnerships, we want to work towards maturing our knowledge base to more complete understanding on a variety of topics, as many topics as possible. And as part of that, I think it's important to recognize that there is work going on by our consortium members that is working to fill in some of these gaps in knowledge. And there's also a lot of knowledge held by practitioners that is not necessarily represented in published literature. And at some point, this knowledge or this work will reach publication. That's one of the most effective ways for communicating it or helping other people access it. But as part of our work to form these manager-scientist collaborations, we want to acknowledge the work that is already going on in the consortium. So the webinar format we're going to try today is a new format for us, and I'm hoping that it allows for more conversation and more exchange of ideas among the consortium members, and especially now, today, people on our webinar. We have 4 panel members participating today: Crystal Kern, USD Forest Service; Michele Richards from Fort Custer Training Center; Joe Harris from Red Lake Nation; and Greg Peterson from BIA are all with us today. They're all participating remotely from their workplace, except Michele, who's with me here in East Lansing. Alicia Selden was not able to participate, so I do have a slide on her information, and I'll be reading through that towards the end. But I'm going to give microphone access to each of these in order as shown for 5 minutes, and then at the end of that, we'll open the floor for discussion and questions, both for the panel members and for me. That sound okay? Crystal, are you ready to go?
Sure.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Well, greetings from Grand Rapids, Minnesota. I'm Crystal Kern, and I'll be sharing some of my ongoing research on prescribed fire in red pine over the next 5 minutes. My ongoing research focuses on red pine forests of the western Great Lakes region. These forests are classic examples of fire-dependent ecosystems that have been affected adversely by decades of fire suppression. Historically, these forests supported frequent surface fires that occurred approximately every 5 to 50 years. They also supported infrequent crown fires, which occurred every 15 to 250 years. Suppression of surface fire in particular has led to dramatic increases in live fuels and reduced opportunities for pine establishment, as you can see in this photo in our current red pine forests. Therefore, using prescribed fire in mature red pine stands or underburning is considered a vital tool to reduce fuels and prepare seedbeds for pine regeneration, while also maintaining a productive overstory tree layer. This is the broad area of research that I'm working in. Specifically, I'm following up on a 1959 red pine burning experiment established in northern Minnesota to test the effects of prescribed fire on woody plant composition and structure. And I'll be calling this study the Cutfoot study for short in my few slides here. The study was designed to test 6 combinations of season, dormant versus summer, and frequency, burning every year, burning every other year, or burning 2 times over a 10-year period, and comparing these treatments with a no-burn control. The study was actively treated and measured between 1960 and 1970. Today, this study gives us a unique opportunity to look at the long-term, long-lasting impacts of different prescribed fire treatments, so 40 years after the last fire. Here's an example from 2005, which would be year 46 of the study, and looking at fire effects on hazel stem density, which is on the y-axis. The different prescribed fire treatments are on the x-axis. The summer annual treatment, which is circled in red, has had long-lasting impacts on the woody shrub community, with stem densities substantially lower in this treatment compared to the others, even 40 years after the last fire. Our remeasurements of the woody vegetation in 2005 also showed that the summer annual burn treatments had long-lasting impacts on shrub diversity and pine regeneration, as you can see in this photograph here. The other treatments were much, much less effective at reducing shrub densities or promoting diversity in pine establishment. Our current records from the Cutfoot study characterize a 45-year history under various prescribed fire treatments, long after the last fire. This is an applied experiment and has been influencing regional fire management for decades, including a recent example at the Red Lake Nation Sonoma Pines Project. Our research here is ongoing, and our goal is to remeasure all aspects of this study, from soils, vegetation, fuels. In fact, we recently received some funding for an internship through the consortium. This is one of the opportunities that Jessica highlighted earlier of trying to bring together scientists and managers to fill one of these knowledge gaps. So this opportunity is for a Leech Lake Tribal College student to study some of the long-term effects on fuels accumulations in this study ecosystem. They'll have the opportunity to work with me at the research station and with fire personnel at the Chippewa National Forest and look at modeling some of the data that they collect at this study site. To our knowledge, this Cutfoot study is the longest replicated study of prescribed fire effects in northern conifers. In fact, few other studies exist, and I have those listed here, and these are mostly short-term, as Jessica highlighted earlier. Thus, understanding the utility of underburning to reduce the buildup of shrubs and subcanopy trees and facilitate pine regeneration remains poorly understood, so there's still much to learn. There are several areas for additional research on underburning red pine. There's a big question of how and when to use prescribed fire in the silvicultural system and stage of stand development of red pine ecosystems. There's a need to understand the effect of underburning on non-timber forest species products. And lastly, there's a need to understand how fire can be used for natural area restoration. And that's all I had, and I'll turn it over to Michele.
Hear me? Is it? Okay. Yes. All right. So I'm Michele Richards. I work at Fort Custer Training Center for Michigan Army National Guard. I've been there for about 10 years, and we have used prescribed fire for all of those. We have a community matrix of upland prairies, wet prairies, and oak forests that we are trying to restore. We have a few remnant high-quality natural communities, which we are most committed to getting back to the place they were circa 1800s. This is an aerial of Fort Custer. We're located between Battle Creek and Kalamazoo, Michigan. We've done a lot of fire, but most of the data that we've collected, we will have to work hard to crunch that and make it better. We've seen some good effects in other burns nearby us that we would like to replicate on our land. And the issues we have dealt with thus far have been that we've had to burn extremely early in the season for our area. So we've been burning in March and mostly before the first week of April, which has given us a lot of duff removal, but it hasn't given us much invasive control or recruitment of native species, which is the goals that we're reaching towards. So my work, I'm working at Western Michigan University, and actually Jessica is working with me as well on doing some research in our area to determine the best season to do burns in. And like Jessica's work didn't cover so much of the plant research, but it's been difficult to find the information that I need to make decisions to manage. So I'm hoping to provide some information to the body of work that other people get to rely on. So we're going to aim for doing some burns later in the season, later in April and May, potentially in November as well, and see if pyrodiversity really does equal biodiversity. I'm working out some measurement methods and trying to make sure that we get the best information possible. And then also some of the knowledge gaps that I've noticed as I've gone through some of this process already are how best to do long-term monitoring in general, but in specific to fire effects and impacts of prescribed fire. So with that, I'm going to make mine short so we can squeeze everybody in on time.
Okay, next up are Greg and Joe.
Well, good afternoon, it's Greg Peterson. I'll be talking a little bit about our project at Red Lake in the Peninsula Pines area. Then I'll turn it over to Joe Harris, who'll be talking about the monitoring that goes on there. First slide up there is our project area. It's located on the Red Lake Indian Reservation in northern Minnesota, between Upper and Lower Red Lakes. The project covers approximately 1,500 acres, and it's in a red and white pine stand that originated from a fire in 1918. It's about 90% red pine, about 10% white pine. The area was heavy with hazelbrush. Started looking at this back in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, that these stands were coming up on final harvest, and how we're going to regenerate that stand and get rid of the hazelbrush and get some natural regen going. So we started looking at the project back then. In 1997, we came up with some objectives. To reintroduce fire into the ecosystem, reduce the competing brush through prescribed fire, and then allow natural regeneration without the use of herbicides. That was one of our goals there. And we've learned a lot of trial and error since then. One of the things that we started doing in early or late 1990s was to start mowing the area to increase our burn windows for summer burning. We found that summer burning is the best to control hazelbrush, as some of the studies that Buckman had done. And we saw that by coming in and using mechanical equipment at any time of the year, we can get a broader window to do our prescribed burning in the summertime. Getting that microclimate down to ground level, getting that hazelbrush down, and going from there. This is a picture of an area that was mowed the summer before and then prescribed burn in July of 2009. You can see that even though we mowed the hazelbrush, it all comes back rather nicely. But after this summer burn, we did really set back the brush on this burn. This is an after picture of another unit that same summer. One of the things that you do encounter with prescribed burning in the summer is your smoke management. A lot more intensities, a lot more duff reduction, which we're after. And we are noticing that we do have a higher mortality rate on our white pine than we do on our red pine in summer burning. And this is a picture of a site that was mowed. Opened up our window, was burned in July of 2005. And this is a picture taken in the summer, 4 years after that burn, really showing some of the effects of setting that hazelbrush back. And I'll turn it over to Joe Harris to talk about some of the monitoring plots we're doing.
Hello, everybody. Joe Harris, the fuel specialist at Red Lake. I work for the Red Lake Tribal Department of Natural Resources, fuel specialist. I want to talk a little bit about our monitoring. We use a FireMon system, which was developed by the Joint Fire Science Program several years ago. It's a pretty extensive system. We kind of tailored it to our own needs. We were introduced to this system by the SCA, the Student Conservation Association, in 2004. They put in a couple of dozen plots. We, over the next 2 years, trained us how to do it, and we are still using it and found it meets our needs pretty well. This is a plot that a couple of our guys did in 2008. I'll go over a little bit about what we do on each site. This system uses the releve approach, so we're just siting our plots in an area that's representative of what we're looking at. So over the years, we've found that small burn units, anywhere from 10 to 15 acres in size, are working best. So we want to make sure that we have a plot in every burn unit. So for those small ones, we're just putting in one plot. This slide here shows a plot that was established, and that's like 6 years after it was mowed. Our baseline plots, of course, we're putting them in after they were mowed, prior to a burn. And the things that we're looking for are the tree data, fuels data, seedling sapling data. For the tree data, we want to determine what the crown class, the crown base height, the live crown ratio, its relative health, and then we're looking at all the ordinary things, DBH, height. We take that on a 10th acre plot. The seedling sapling data, that's for the tree species, and we're looking at we take that on what I call a micro plot, so centered on the same point as the larger plot, and we're recording everything over 4.5 feet tall, but smaller than 4.5 inches dBH. Our fuels data we use a Brown's transect, and we put up to 7 75-foot transects. And there we get our fine woody debris, coarse woody debris, and we also measure the organic layer. So we're getting our duff and litter profile there and measured in inches, and our live and dead vegetation data on that same transect. And we're coming up with some what we really expected with it when we started doing summer burns. We reduced the duff by 75%, and that is our long-term goal. The goals of the project are to reintroduce fire into the ecosystem and also to set it up for natural regeneration. So the duff is the main thing, and we also are looking at mortality. We don't want to kill any more of the red pine than we have to. So this slide that's up right now, that's we remeasure our plots the summer following a burn. That photo, of course, was taken right after a burn. We want to get a photo record too. And that pretty much wraps up what we do as far as monitoring at Red Lake. We, of course, get good information, and as far as how this relates to the webinar here today, funding is pretty important. It's always a worry, a concern for us, and we have to stretch our dollars. It's just 2 of us in the fuels program at Red Lake, and we do a lot. Time is a big constraint. So we are looking for any kind of answers we might get as to, tell us how we might do things better, or whether we're even have if we're on the right road to what our goals are. So that I'll turn it over. Yeah, it wraps up Red Lake's section.
Jessica, are you ready to discuss Alicia's work?
You hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I think my mute button was stuck. Okay, so this last slide that I have up right now is from Alicia Selden, and she's with the Michigan DNR. She's running a project to look at prescribed fire effects on eastern box turtles, and she's doing this work at Fort Custer Recreation Area. Her background for this is that people want to use prescribed fire, but often it's in habitats where species of special concern occur, and this is complicated when the species are limited in how far they can move, something like a box turtle or other types of reptiles and amphibians. And so you want to be cautious with how and when you apply the prescribed fires so that you're limiting injury and mortality. A lot of what she has found is that managers utilizing prescribed fire in box turtle habitat are told to burn early in the spring prior to box turtle emergence to limit injury and mortality. But this is challenging because the timing of box turtle emergence varies from year to year. There's still not good understanding on what actually triggers turtles to emerge, so you're guessing on when the cutoff day is each year. And by burning early, you're not necessarily getting the vegetative response that you want or that you need to meet your vegetation management goals. So the ultimate goal of our project will be, or the end result will be, to produce a guide to utilizing prescribed fire in box turtle habitat, and that will address the timing, frequency, location, and types of burn that can be used to minimize negative effects on box turtles. And also will work to identify options for post-spring fires. The goals are to determine the population status of eastern box turtles at Fort Custer, including evaluating the effects of prescribed fire on the population. Their objectives are to evaluate population abundance, age structure, and sources of mortality, and they'll do this by collecting baseline data that will inform their long-term monitoring. They want to determine where box turtles are during each different times of the year, and that will help determine whether burning grasslands in early spring is okay because the turtles are still in the woods or not. They want to determine whether there are hot spots or congregations of box turtles so that you can avoid damaging a large proportion of the population in a single burn. And by identifying box turtle overwintering and nesting locations that can help identify areas of greatest conservation need. They're working to evaluate the effects of burning season and habitat type on turtle injury and mortality. And also, as part of that, they're studying box turtle shell decomposition so that it will help them determine whether, if they find a shell during a post-burn survey, that will help them determine whether the shell is a result of a mortality caused by the fire, or if the shell was present before the fire and was burned over in the fire. And Michele Richards just put a comment in. Good news is that they've seen so far, though it's not published, that after November 1st, they're 15 centimeters below the soil surface. Okay, so we've gotten through the panel, and this is great because it's showing what consortium members or partners are doing, some of the challenges they're facing, some of the work they're doing to address knowledge gaps. You've heard about some of the knowledge gaps that they've encountered as they're doing background work, and the rationale for why they're doing certain projects, or why they're doing certain projects in a certain way, what's working for them, what's not. So for the rest of our time, we officially have, I think, until another 20 minutes. I understand people might need to sign off, but for the rest of our time, I'd just like to open it up for discussion. You can use the chat box to type your questions and comments in, and either to me or hopefully also to the panel members. So I guess I'll just turn over to Charles to moderate that part.
Great. Well, thanks, Jessica. Hopefully we'll get some questions coming in here. One of the things I'd like to highlight here this afternoon is that we've identified these gaps, as Jessica's pointed out, that are in the peer-reviewed literature. But what she's nicely done, and our panel members have done, is highlight those areas that really don't come into or in that under that umbrella of the peer-reviewed literature. And to be honest, there's probably more information in that realm than we would find in the peer-reviewed publications at this point in time, as we've identified in the gaps. Now, one of the things that we've tried to do, and Zeke's been really leading the charge on and has done a really nice job with, is on our website we have these demonstration sites. And in fact, the demonstrate site network and the one for the underburning in red pine in Minnesota has a lot of information that Joe and Greg were talking about, as well as Crystal, integrated into this conservation registry portal that we have set up for our demonstration site network. And that's the kind of thing that we would love to work with you if you have kind of information that you'd like to share to build additional sites within this demonstration network, or use that as a resource if there are questions that you might have. Zeke's built a nice set of indexed keywords that can really help with that. So I guess one question's come in from Dave Newman here. How well known are the effects on prescribed burning on nutrient cycling in red pine in Michigan? We'll throw that out to you, Jessica, as well as the rest of the panel, or the rest of the audience as well.
Yeah, so that's a very specific question. So offhand, I don't know if there were red pine forests in Michigan that had nutrient cycling addressed. The peer-reviewed publication we have, which there's a link to that directly in our consortium database, so you can just enter my last name or soils, and I think if you type in soils, it'll be the third article that comes up. You can link to that directly, and that will give you a summary of there's supplementary information available on the journal website, and that will, in that supplemental table, it will summarize all response variables for every study, including the study location. In the tables in the main document, I summarize the magnitude and direction of response, but I don't have location in there, and they're just categorized by broad, like pine-dominated forest, mixed wood, or deciduous. But out of the 63 publications identified, only 5 of the studies occurred in mixed pine forests. So I don't remember offhand whether any of those looked at nutrient cycling. We do know that as far as like nutrient pools, like inorganic nitrogen, we have no information on inorganic nitrogen in pure mineral soil anywhere in the region in pine-dominated forests. And that was surprising. I mean, David Rothstein at Michigan State has done a lot of work on nutrient pools and nutrient cycling in jack pine forests. And in his work, he's combined a portion of the organic soil layer with mineral soil. So that's, I didn't consider that mineral soil information only. Particularly post-harvest for removal of logging slash. Yeah, and again, I'll direct you to that publication and to the supplement tables, which will sell that information rather than an author name in that. Michelle's right here. Do you want to read your comment?
Well, you should answer Greg's question.
Oh, Greg's question is, how well covered were theses and dissertations in the literature review? Pretty poorly, I think. ISI identifies some of these. There's also a database called Dissertation Abstracts, I think, and I did, early on in this project, I did try searching in it for the same set of keywords that I used for ISI Web of Knowledge for the peer-reviewed, or for ISI Web of Knowledge, and it was very interesting because using dissertation abstracts, I did not pull up like master's or PhD theses that I knew of that had been conducted in the Lake States region, and it actually pulled up my dissertation, which was done in a Northern California mixed conifer forest in, the other side of the country, and that study was done at Ohio State, which was, obviously not in our consortium region. So I don't really understand how or why that the dissertation abstract database has not been effective at identifying those. So that is a gap in what is currently represented in our database. Many theses are eventually converted to peer-reviewed journal articles, and those would be, I assume most of those are captured in our database. So also what I found is that some agency technical reports are published first as a technical report and then later as a peer-reviewed document. So there's some duplication and there are some holes in the database. So Michelle's comment is,
I can say it if you
yeah,
want.
go ahead.
So there's been tossing back and forth in the fire community, at least in Southwest Michigan, for a long time about having a place where we can post gray literature, white literature that people are willing to share that it may have copyright issues, as well as whatever written documentation fire managers have kept that may or may not be, scientifically perfectly sound for publication, but might be beneficial to other managers, as well as a place to have that, juried. People can discuss it and debate and what have you, like a blog kind of thing. So I don't know if that's in the, venue of the Lake States Fire Consortium or what, but that might be something that would provide some more interaction and possibilities for information sharing.
Yeah, Michelle, this is Charles. Let me take a stab at that to start with, and put out a request to everybody that's here or that may be listening after the fact to a recording of this webinar. What we would like to do is include that kind of information into what we're calling our Lake States Fire Science Knowledge Bank. And the first part of that infrastructure is this gap analysis and the database that Jessica has worked so hard over the last 24 to 27 months to develop. So that's definitely something that we would like to capture, and we would welcome any of you, or if you know of anybody, to let them know that they could send that to us, and we can work to integrate that information into this knowledge bank. So I think it's a great idea. It's something that we'd like to try to build, develop. It's kind of a never-ending process, but one that I think would be worthwhile, as you've highlighted. The other thing, and I don't pretend to be a techno wizard with all this stuff either, but there is an opportunity to develop some sort of wiki page that we could develop and allow people to edit with information and kind of develop and build basically thoughts and expertise down into written words that we could keep and allow to evolve over time. And that's something that I don't think those of us that are involved with the consortia on a day-to-day basis have given too much thought to in the past, but it's something that we might want to consider in light of your comment here today.
Great idea. Great solution.
Yeah, and I will also say that the agency reports that ISI has been able to identify are some of the major ones, like publications from USDA Forest Service, Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources, some state-level agency reports. But if there are smaller, like more local reports that are just sitting on a shelf in an agency office, those are ones that are particularly difficult for me to identify. And so if any of you in the audience now are aware of a shelf in your agency office library or common area that has technical reports, having scanned copies of those would be helpful for me, just to be able to catalog what information exists. And there are in the database, I've also included keywords. I didn't include these on a standard list that you can pull up and see, but I also included additional keywords for myself to be able to identify what type of publication it was, whether it was published in a journal article, as a proceedings, as an agency technical report, whether it presented what I was calling primary research, which is rigorous scientific assessment, or whether it was more of a case study, observation, or a research note. So things like that I can include in the database and categorize in a way that we can differentiate between the quality or the rigor of the information. But I do need our consortium partners to help identify what those documents are.
Jessica, I'd like to throw out to the group here your last question, your last bullet point there, which gets to barriers both to the panel members as well as those in the audience. So what are some of the barriers that you find that limits your access or your ability to find the information? Is it more you just don't know, there's just not a common place? Is it time? What are those barriers, and how can we help the folks in the community deal with those issues? About maybe the panel members, Crystal, Greg, Joe.
This is Greg Peterson. When we started our project looking at in '97, we started looking for research that had been done on hazelbrush, and we found 2 publications, but going to a specific location was hard to pinpoint, what were the right words to type in. We did find them through the North Central Experimental Research Station there, Grand Rapids. I was able to get them out of that, I believe. But it was real hard, real difficult to find where to go, what were the keywords to type in, and those are the only 2 ones that I was able to find at that time.
This is Michele. Only because now I'm a student, I have access to databases through the university library, but in general, it's really hard if you're not a student or a professor to find any published papers aside from things that are on the Forest Service websites. So you're kind of up the creek without the paddle if you want something besides governmental published papers.
Now, would some sort of annotated bibliography of, and Jessica's going to have a heart attack when I mention this, but of the 1,200 plus references or articles that are part of our current knowledge bank, would that be something that would be quite helpful? And by annotated bibliography means something that we distill down all of the relevant information that we tend to think is relevant. Obviously, that might be an issue, but is that something that I guess would be very helpful, or is that something that you might not think you would use that often?
It might be kind of helpful. I'm trying to think if I just had a tiny abstract of, then I'd have to go to the library and find it myself. I suppose if you're near the university, then that would be Ducky. But if you're not, then there's MELCAT, but our state library, sometimes you can get stuff from them and sometimes you can't.
Right.
So sure, it would be helpful to point you in the right direction. I don't know if it would give you the information that you need in an easy format.
Yeah, this is Joe. I think it'd be helpful. I know when you can Google a pretty specific question, and I think you got the keywords just right, and you'll be swamped with something that's only distantly related. So yeah, it would help us.
Great. Well, I guess before we wrap things up here, what about prioritization as we move forward and we communicate with the consortium here to our members and our partners? For those of you that are joining us here today for the panel, where do you see the most the needs that would help you do your job better? Is having the database sufficient so that you can do your own background work, or how can we help you, I guess, is where I'm going with this question.
I guess I can provide one comment. This is Crystal Kern. I think the database you're going to have is going to be invaluable, great access whether you're in research or in management. And the opportunities you've already presented with the small seed grant for an internship was really great to bring scientists and managers together. And, in my case, it's funding that's going towards the remeasurement, so continuing these long-term studies and adding some fields information, which were both things that Jessica had mentioned earlier in the talk about knowledge gaps. So, even that little chunk of money for an internship will really go far in providing knowledge.
Great, thanks. Anybody else want to contribute anything to that?
Especially from the audience, we'd be interested in hearing what you guys have to say also, what your knowledge needs are.
we might have worn everybody out, Jessica. I think we can wrap things up here today. By all means, if you have some time to think about this, or something comes to you after we've completed the webinar here today and you want to send us a note, we'd be welcome to hear from you, and be more than happy to talk offline about some of this stuff in more detail if it's something that we can help you with. And by all means, that's what we're all about here, and what we're trying to build with this knowledge bank. So I think as we wrap things up, we have a couple of announcements. I think a lot of work has gone into this. Jessica?
Also, I just want to thank you for putting up this last slide. I do want to emphasize that there are many people that were really instrumental in the knowledge bank, especially David Mladenoff at the UW was my host for the 2 years I was there, and all the UW students. And then especially getting the database up and searchable, Dave Lonis and Elizabeth Toman. So especially big thank you to them, and also to the panel members. So